So today I start high above the Neches River at Neches Bluff Campground. This was once home to the Caddo people of Texas. Deep in the East Texas countryside lies Caddo Mounds State Historic Site. So the Caddo people first arrived in this area about 1,500 years ago. They were once the largest and most powerful group of Native Americans in the area we now call Texas. These mounds were built by the Caddo people, but what we see today are actually erosional remnants of large pyramids that once had temples built on top, and these were surrounded by large settlements. There isn't much stone in this part of the world, so they had to use the materials that were available, and so these were made out of mud and wood. These pyramids were once considerably larger, and there are 3 left at this historic site. And the one you just saw is I believe the tallest of the 3. And then the one I showed earlier is significantly wider. And there's one other smaller mound across the way there. So running through this historic site is the El Camino Real. This is an historic route that runs from Mexico City through Texas all the way to Natchitoches, Louisiana. So just one other side note about this historic site. A recent hurricane damaged some of the structures here. Fortunately, those are expected to be repaired by summer of 2021. So now we're hiking through the beautiful forest here at Mission Tejas State Park. If you fast forward hundreds of years later, beyond the time of the Caddo Mounds, this was the original site of the first Spanish mission in Texas in the year 1690. It was called Mission San Francisco de los Tejas. It was named for the local Caddo people that were considered suitable for conversion to Christianity. Tejas is the Caddo word for friend or ally. Unfortunately, the Spanish introduced European diseases to the Caddo people, and after 3 years of hardship, with many of them dying from these diseases, this mission was abandoned. Years later, it moved to San Antonio in the year 1731 and was renamed Mission San Francisco de la Espada. And you can see that mission today in San Antonio. So later in the year 1725, the Comanches arrived in Texas. With horses, they became some of the most skilled warriors in world history, in my opinion. No one could touch them out on the open prairie. Fortunately for the Caddo, these woods largely shielded them from raids from the Comanches and later Kiowa. So as I stated before, unfortunately, Europeans introduced diseases that the Caddo people had little immunity to, and through time, it decimated the population and greatly reduced their strength in numbers. This once great nation would never recover and never be the same again. So now we're at the Alabama Caddo Reservation here in East Texas. If we fast forward to the 1830s, multiple other groups of Native Americans from the eastern U.S. were pushed west into Caddo territory. Unlike Sam Houston, who was very sympathetic toward the Native Americans, the second president of the Republic of Texas, President Lamar, he wanted all Native Americans pushed out of East Texas. Mexico was certainly a factor in this. They conspired with the Native Americans. They wanted to use them to create a buffer state in East Texas to stop the continued westward expansion of the U.S. and reclaim Texas. And so, just to view things as objectively as I can understand why Mexico felt that way. And so just because Mexico had plans doesn't mean that any of the Native Americans were going to go along with it. In 1839, these plans were discovered on a Mexican agent. Then all Native Americans of East Texas were then forced out. Only two groups were allowed to remain in this part of the state: the Alabama and Caddo. The word Tejas, again, is the Caddo word for friend or ally. The very people that Texas got its name from, the friendly Caddo, were forced out. These groups were essentially the casualties of an ongoing struggle between the U.S., Mexico, and the Comanche Kiowa of West Texas. What role did the Comanches play in all of this? Well, they raided Native American, Mexican, and Anglo settlements continuously. Unfairly, this helped to create a distrust of Native Americans in general, even though many fought alongside the Anglos against the Comanches. There are other issues that may have influenced the way things worked out in history for the Caddo, such as occasional raids that involved them, and possible involvement with Mexico, as mentioned earlier in 1838. However, this was a period of tremendous instability in Texas, as the Comanches, Mexico, and Texas played tug-of-war with the Caddo and other Native Americans. Many Caddo were pushed north out of Texas in 1839, but the last remnants, along with multiple other groups, were moved west to the Brazos Reservation and squeezed between Anglo settlers and the Comanches, often facing starvation. This was a semi-arid land and very foreign to them. They were used to the lush forests of East Texas. And it was very difficult for them to survive in this relatively harsh climate. Eventually, they were peaceful farmers for a few years on the reservation in the 1850s. By 1859, after 7 Caddo were brutally murdered in their sleep, they finally went to Oklahoma Territory for their own safety. 200 years after their first contact with Europeans, their population had been reduced by 90%. Major Robert S. Neighbors, the courageous agent who lobbied on behalf of the Native Americans, was shot in the back when he returned to Texas after escorting them to Oklahoma. So I'm just south of the Caddo tribal headquarters. This is actually at the Wichita Tribal History Center. And I wanted to capture this because this is very similar to the type of dwelling that the Caddo lived in. And there was one at Caddo Mounds up until recently, until a hurricane damaged it. So I just wanted to capture a little video here of this beautiful structure. Wow, look at that. like it. So I do want to mention a few more things. In making this video, I read Lone Star, A History of Texas and the Texans by T.R. Fehrenbach, and Gone to Texas, A History of the Lone Star State by Randolph B. Campbell. In telling this story, I tended to lean more toward Fehrenbach, mostly because it was written first and I also read it first. However, the Campbell book is also very informative and worth reading for sure.